The Carter household, tucked in a quiet cul-de-sac on the edge of a forested Oregon suburb, had the sort of calm that most families only dreamed of. On that rainy spring night, nothing seemed out of the ordinary. The clock in the hallway ticked softly. The hum of the refrigerator rose and fell in lazy rhythms. Outside, wind stirred the trees gently, and rain slid down the windows in smooth, steady lines. Inside, baby Lily slept peacefully in her crib. At 10 months old, she had just begun to take wobbly steps between the couch and the coffee table. That day had been a big one, her first successful step without falling, and both Mark and Emily had clapped and cheered as if she'd just run a marathon. Now she was nestled under a soft pink blanket, her favorite stuffed koala tucked under, one chubby arm. The white noise machine on her nightstand whirred softly, imitating the distant sound of waves crashing. The nursery was dim, lit only by the faint blue glow of the nightlight shaped like a crescent moon. Mark, a 32-year-old firefighter, had worked a long shift at Station 8 and finally returned home just after dinner. He was used to chaos, sirens, smoke, rescues, but home was sacred, safe, predictable. He'd kissed Lily goodnight, showered, and practically collapsed into bed next to Emily by 9:30 p.m. Emily, 30, had spent the entire day running on little rest. Between Lily's teething, folding laundry, cooking meals, and managing her freelance work from her laptop, she had hit her limit just before dinner. Max, their 5-year-old German shepherd, had been her shadow all day, moving from room to room, never letting Lily out of his sight. That wasn't unusual. Max had always been protective, almost unnervingly so, especially since Lily was born. The family had adopted Max from a local shelter when he was just a pup. He had been found abandoned on the side of a mountain road, malnourished but fiercely intelligent. They'd brought him home on a whim after Emily fell in love with his deep brown eyes. Over time, Max had become more than a pet. He was a silent guardian, a constant presence, never needing to be asked twice when it came to Lily. On this particular night, he lay curled in his usual spot near the front door, head on his paws, eyes half-lidded but alert. The rain picked up slightly outside, tapping faster against the window panes. At 2:53 a.m., Max's head jerked up. Something was off. He sniffed the air once, twice, then stood up slowly. His ears pointed toward the hallway, then rotated back toward the kitchen. A barely perceptible sound, not quite a crack, more like the tearing of dry paper, reached him. His nose twitched. It wasn't fear. Not yet. Just discomfort. A warning rippled down his spine. He moved silently toward the hallway, claws clicking softly on the hardwood floor. He paused outside the nursery, nose pressed against the door. The scent was stronger here, sharp and unfamiliar, faint but alarming. Max pawed once at the door. Nothing. The humans didn't stir. He barked, just once. Silence. He barked again, this time a bit louder. Still nothing, and that was when instinct took over. Not something learned, not something trained, something primal, something ancient, buried in the DNA of wolves and protectors. Max pushed the nursery door open with his snout. Inside, Lily lay still, her cheeks flushed in sleep. Her small lips parted slightly as she breathed deeply. The scent was here too, and it was getting stronger. He stepped into the room slowly, and then Max made a decision no one could have expected. A decision that would change everything before the night was over. Max stood over the crib, muscles tight beneath his coat, ears perked like twin antennas receiving signals from a world beyond human perception. His eyes didn't blink. His breath came slow but deep. Every fiber in his body hummed with tension. The scent in the air had shifted again, acrid, synthetic, and threatening. He couldn't name it. He couldn't rationalize it. But he didn't need to. All he knew was that it didn't belong, and it was coming closer. He moved his nose closer to Lily, her soft baby scent still untouched by whatever danger hovered beyond the walls. She stirred a little in her sleep, her pudgy fingers gripping the edge of her blanket. A low whimper escaped, her lips just a small sound, but it made Max whine softly in response. He pressed his snout closer, nudged the blanket away from her face and looked toward the door. The smell was growing, and now there was heat. He paced quickly back to the hallway, sniffed the air near the kitchen entrance, then returned to the crib, back and forth, his urgency building with each round. His claws clicked louder now, echoing through the sleeping house, but still no one came. Max gave a sharper bark. Still silence. He didn't understand why they weren't responding, why his people, his pack, hadn't come to investigate. The child was in danger, and if no one else was going to act, he would. Max trotted to the crib and stood on his hind legs, placing his front paws on the edge. It rocked slightly under his weight. He bent forward and gingerly grabbed hold of Lily's onesie between his teeth, the cloth loose enough not to hurt, firm enough to lift. Lily stirred again, eyes fluttering open for half a second before, drifting closed, she let out a sleepy breath, still half dreaming. Max didn't hesitate. He pulled. Carefully, inch by inch, he eased her upward, supporting her head as much as he could, using the strength of his neck and front legs. It wasn't smooth, it wasn't fast, but it was working. Her legs dangled slightly over the edge as Max slowly, methodically lowered her onto the floor of the nursery, blanket still tangled beneath her. She landed with a soft thump. Her eyes fluttered again, a sleepy grunt bubbling from her lips, but she didn't cry. Something in her too seemed to trust the big warm shape that hovered protectively over her. Max paused to look at her once more. Then he gently took hold of the fabric near her shoulders again and began dragging her slowly toward the door. The house was dark and still. The only illumination came from the blue nightlight and a faint street lamp glow bleeding in through the living room window. In the hallway, the ticking clock continued its steady rhythm, unaware of the emergency creeping beneath its watch. Max pulled Lily past the doorway. She slid slowly over the hardwood floor, her small fists bumping the sides of her body. At the far end of the hallway, Max could now see the faintest shimmer in the air. Heat distortion, like invisible waves rising toward the ceiling. That was when he let out another bark, loud, sharp, commanding. And this time, it was heard. Emily stirred in bed. One eye opened, confused, then both. She heard it again, a bark and something else in a dragging sound. She nudged Mark. "Do you hear that?" Mark groaned, still half asleep. "What is it?" "I think it's Max. Something's wrong." She sat up, heart picking up speed. The dragging sound came again, faint, slow, steady, like something being pulled across the floor. "Mark," she whispered. "He's not just barking, he's moving something." They threw off the blankets and ran into the hallway, and there, barely lit by the nightlight's glow, they saw a sight that shattered the night's stillness. Max hunched, low, tugging Lily gently across the floor toward them. His eyes wild, his bark urgent. Emily screamed. Mark rushed forward. They had no idea that their dog wasn't panicking. He was trying to save them all. Max had never been inside Lily's crib, never once attempted to climb in or interfere with the soft baby space where she slept. But tonight wasn't like any other night. Tonight, something was wrong. After pacing the hallway and trying, in vain, to wake the humans with his urgent barks, Max returned to the nursery. The scent of burning was clearer now, faint but foul. His ears pinned back as a distant, unfamiliar sound echoed from the kitchen, a low crackling, like dry wood snapping. Max didn't know what fire was in the way humans did, but his instincts told him what his senses were screaming. Danger was inside the house. He stood on his hind legs again, planting his front paws carefully against the side of the crib. He looked down at Lily, still asleep, lips softly parted, cheeks rosy with warmth. She squirmed a little in her dream, her tiny fingers curled around the ear of her plush koala. Max let out a small whine. A final call for help. Nothing. So he did the only thing left to do. Something instinctual, unthinkable. He leaned in, opened, his mouth gently, and clamped his teeth around the fabric of Lily's pink onesie. He pulled slowly, easing her weight toward the railing. She slid without much resistance, her soft body too small to fight gravity. One arm flopped over the side of the crib. Then her head followed. Max adjusted his grip, tightening slightly on the shoulder seam. He grunted, strained, and finally pulled Lily up and over the rail, easing her down to the nursery carpet with all the care of a mother lifting her newborn. She landed with a small thump and a sleepy grunt, her face twitching, but not crying. Max sniffed her face once, then licked her cheek quickly. She opened one eye briefly, then closed it again, her body limp in trust. Max looped around behind her and began dragging her backward, slowly, deliberately, toward the hallway. The blanket snagged briefly under her legs, but Max tugged harder, pulling it free as her little socks slipped softly across the wooden floorboards. Each movement was careful, calculated. He paused every few seconds to adjust his grip or check her breathing. The weight of her wasn't much, less than 20 pounds, but his mouth grew sore from holding so gently for so long. Still, he didn't let go. The hallway stretched ahead like a tunnel. The house, once safe and silent, now carried faint hints of threat. The taste of smoke on the air, the scent of melting plastic from the laundry room socket, the nearly imperceptible flicker of light from the baseboard, where something inside the wall had begun to glow. Max's feet made no sound on the hardwood. Lily's onesie whispered against the floor. He passed the base of the stairs, eyes flicking toward the bedrooms. He barked again, sharper this time, commanding. Finally, a response. A muffled voice stirred. A bed creaked. Footsteps. And then, light flooded the hallway. Emily stood frozen in the bedroom doorway, hair tousled, eyes wide with confusion. What is he? She couldn't finish. Mark appeared behind her, blinking sleep from his eyes. He followed her gaze down the hallway, and everything inside him went still. There, not 10 feet away, was their German shepherd. And in his jaws dragging carefully across the floor was Lily. The baby, their baby. Jesus Christ, Mark breathed. What is he doing? Emily cried out, stumbling forward. Max, let her go. Drop it. But Max didn't snarl. He didn't run. Or panic. He released Lily the moment Emily came closer, then turned on his paws and barked toward the kitchen. Not once. Not twice. 3 sharp barks, urgent, forceful, deliberate. Mark smelled it then. Smoke, he ran. And Emily, baby in her arms, confusion and fear rising like floodwater in her throat, turned to follow. Max ran with them, now leading the charge toward a danger only he had sensed minutes earlier, and every second counted. Emily's scream cut through the hallway like shattered glass. The sight of Max dragging Lily, their baby, across the floor in the dead of night was something she couldn't even begin to process. Her body moved on instinct. She rushed forward, scooping Lily into her arms, her voice trembling. Oh my God, and what is happening? What was he doing? But Lily wasn't hurt. Not scratched, not bruised, just confused, a little fussy now, her head resting heavily on Emily's shoulder as she stirred awake. Her onesie was damp where Max's mouth had held her, but otherwise she looked fine. That fact alone made Emily pause. Max wasn't attacking her. He hadn't panicked or barked in confusion. He had moved with purpose. He had barked not at her but past her, toward the kitchen. Mark, now fully alert, had already started down the hallway. Something's not right, he muttered. The air was warmer, not hot, not yet, but warmer than it should have been, and something faint tugged at his nose, a bitter, artificial scent. He knew that smell. Burning plastic. He sprinted toward the kitchen. The glow hit him as soon as he turned the corner, an eerie orange shimmer pulsing from the laundry room. Through the cracked door, he saw it. Flames. Not roaring yet, but licking. Up the wall behind the dryer, creeping with a terrifying hunger. Fire, he shouted, voice rising. Emily, get out of the house now. She froze, her arms tightened around Lily. What? It's in the laundry room. It's already started. Go! Emily's legs moved before her brain caught up. She turned and ran barefoot to the front door, Max racing beside her. She fumbled with the lock, heart hammering, her breath sharp with panic. Smoke was beginning to seep toward the ceiling in the hallway now, faint but visible. She flung the door open and stepped out into the cold night air, rain still falling lightly onto the porch. Max hovered beside her as if refusing to let her go back in. Lily whimpered softly against her chest, her eyes finally blinking open, and the moment Emily saw her baby fully awake and safe, The tears came. Inside, Mark grabbed the emergency fire blanket and tossed it over the growing flames. To buy time, he shouted back down the hallway, "Call 911, the wall's already burning." Emily, shaking, pulled her phone from her pajama pocket and dialed with trembling fingers. Her voice cracked as she gave the address to the dispatcher. "My husband's—" "A firefighter. He's trying to slow it down, but the wall is burning, it's inside the wall." Mark bolted out of the house a minute later, coughing, his eyes red from the smoke. He pulled the front door shut behind him and dropped to his knees on the wet concrete, gasping. Emily ran to him. "Are you okay? Did it spread?" He nodded, still catching his breath. "It's bad. If he didn't wake us..." They both turned to look at Max. He stood a few feet away, his thick coat damp from the misty rain, his chest rising and falling steadily. His eyes weren't wild with fear. They were focused, steady, like a soldier after a mission. Emily knelt and wrapped an arm around his neck. "You saved her," she whispered, hugging him close. "You saved our baby." Max licked her cheek, then stepped back to stand between her and the house, watching the front door like a sentry. And then, faintly at first, they heard the distant wail of sirens. Help was on the way. But the real hero of the night had already acted, long before the humans had even smelled the smoke. The sirens grew louder by the second, rising above the hiss of the rain and the dull roar of fire spreading behind the walls. Emily held Lily tight to her chest, wrapped now in a blanket she'd grabbed from the car. Max sat beside her, alert, his head turning every few seconds toward the front door, then back to Emily. Mark stood at the curb, waving frantically as the first fire engine barreled around the corner. Its headlights cut through the night mist, tires screeching slightly as it came to a halt in front of the house. Firefighters jumped out in practiced chaos, hoses uncoiling, masks snapping on, boots pounding across pavement. One of them recognized Mark instantly. "Mark, Jesus, you okay?" Mark nodded. "We're out, everyone's safe. The fire started in the wall behind the laundry unit. Could be electrical." Another firefighter glanced at the house. Smoke was now drifting from the vents under the eaves, curling into the night air like ghostly fingers. "How long ago did it start?" 15 minutes, maybe less. "But it's moving fast," Mark said, voice tight. "I tried to contain it. The wall's dry. It's feeding the flames." The crew surged into action. Two ran hoses toward the back. Another broke open the front door with a halogen bar. The moment it swung open, smoke billowed outward in a thick, choking cloud. It carried the unmistakable stench of plastic, insulation, and scorched wood. Emily watched from the lawn, her arms aching from holding Lily, who was now fully awake and clinging tightly to her. The baby let out a soft cry as the air filled with sirens and shouting. Emily rocked her gently, her own tears mixing with the rain. "It's okay, baby," she whispered over and over. "We're okay. Thanks to Max." Max sat rigid beside them, his eyes locked on the fire truck. His ears twitched at every sound. He didn't tremble. He didn't cower. But his body was taut, as if he was still on high alert, waiting for the next threat. He wasn't finished protecting them. Not yet. One firefighter jogged over to Emily. "Ma'am, we need you a little farther back. There's a propane tank near the kitchen wall. If it heats up, it could blow." Emily's heart stuttered. She nodded quickly and moved to the neighbor's driveway across the street. Max stayed close, pressed against her leg like a magnet. She turned and looked back at the house, and that's when she truly saw it. The home she had decorated piece by piece, with baby photos, hand-painted wall quotes, and 1,000 little memories. It was burning. The edges of the roof were glowing faintly now, and fire danced behind the living room window. In less than 20 minutes, their safe place had become a glowing furnace. Her knees gave slightly. Mark appeared beside her in a flash, catching her arm. Hey, don't look at that right now. I can't believe this is happening," she said in a whisper. If he hadn't gone into the nursery..." "I know," Mark said, wrapping an arm around her. "I keep thinking the same thing." They both turned to look at Max again. His fur was wet and matted, his sides heaving gently from exertion. He didn't look like a hero. He looked like a dog who'd done what he had to, and was waiting. For what came next? Just then, one of the firefighters emerged from the house, mask pulled back, sweat mixing with soot on his face. "Flames are knocked down in the main hallway," he called. "We stopped it before it reached the bedrooms." Emily let out a sob of relief. The nursery, Lily's nursery, might be damaged, but it wasn't gone. Mark looked at Max and whispered, "You didn't just save her, you saved all of us." Max finally sat down, ears slowly relaxing, tail thumping the ground just once, like punctuation at the end of a mission completed. But the story wasn't over yet. By the time dawn broke, the fire was out. What remained of the family's home stood in eerie silence, soaked and steaming. Blackened beams jutted from the roof like broken bones. The windows were shattered, their frames dripping with ash and water. Inside, the walls were scorched, the floors warped from the thousands of gallons of water poured into the house overnight. Emily sat wrapped in a blanket on a neighbor's porch across the street, Lily asleep in her arms. Her body ached from tension, and her throat was raw from crying and smoke, but her daughter was alive, safe, breathing peacefully with one pudgy fist curled near her face. And Max was right at their feet. He hadn't moved far from Lily since the rescue. Now he lay curled beside her carrier, soaked to the bone, paws twitching slightly in exhaustion. But he didn't sleep. His ears stayed partially lifted, his eyes still half open. As if even now, hours after the danger had passed, he wasn't quite ready to rest. Mark walked up the driveway toward them, face streaked with soot, jaw tight. He was wearing his backup station hoodie now, his turnout gear hanging in the fire truck nearby. His steps were slow, heavy, not from injury, but from the weight of realization. He sank down beside Emily and exhaled hard. "It's bad," he said. "We'll need to rebuild most of it." Emily nodded slowly, eyes not leaving Lily's face. "But we're here," she said softly. "We're alive." Mark didn't speak for a moment. Then he looked at Max, who blinked up at him without lifting his head. "I've run into a lot of fires in my time," Mark said, voice quieter now. "Seen families lose everything, seen people not get out. We wouldn't have known until it was too late. 10 more minutes, maybe 5. He trailed off, then looked at Emily again. "We owe him everything." She nodded, her lips trembling. Across the yard, a reporter from the local news station was setting up a camera. Someone had called in the story, probably a neighbor who'd witnessed Max pulling the baby out of the house. The fire captain had already confirmed the cause, a faulty wire in the wall behind the dryer. A silent, invisible danger, sparked just after 2:50 a.m. Emily shivered as the memory of that hour came, rushing back. "Do you think he could actually smell it starting?" she whispered. Mark nodded. "I do. Some dogs can smell electrical arcing and heat, but it's not just that." He reached down, gently scratching behind Max's ears. He knew she was in danger, and when we didn't wake up, he acted anyway. Max let out a quiet grunt and shifted, resting his chin on Mark's boot. That moment, captured in silence, said more than any headline ever could. Within an hour, the story had spread. First on the news station's morning broadcast, then across social media. Photos of Max sitting stoically beside the fire truck circulated like wildfire. "Hero dog saves sleeping baby from house fire." Comments poured in, admiration, awe, and disbelief, but none of it mattered to Max. To him, he hadn't done anything extraordinary. He'd seen a threat. He'd protected his family, that was all. A soft knock on the porch railing made Emily look up. The fire captain stood there holding something in one hand. "Hey," he said gently. "You dropped this on the lawn earlier." It was Lily's plush koala, soot-stained, one ear singed but still intact. Emily took it in trembling hands and tucked it beside her daughter. Then she looked at Max, who raised his eyes just enough to meet hers. "You're not just a good boy," she whispered. "You're the reason she's still breathing." Max blinked slowly, finally closing his eyes for real, and drifted into the first peaceful sleep he'd had since saving his pack from the fire. By noon, Max was famous. The local news had done a live segment from the sidewalk outside the charred remains of the house. The headline flashed across the screen in bold, "Hero dog saves infant from fire while parents sleep." That was all. It took Within hours, news stations across the country were replaying the story. It exploded across social media, a rare story that broke through the noise with something pure. Loyalty, instinct, love. Footage showed Max, damp and soot-stained, standing guard next to Lily's stroller while fire crews wrapped up. Someone had taken a photo of him mid-bark, staring at the house as if daring the flames to return. Another clip showed him sitting beside Emily, his paw resting gently on her foot, unmoving even as sirens blared. The internet couldn't get enough. Words like angel, guardian, and miracle dog filled the comment sections. Offers poured in. Everything from dog food companies offering a year's supply to children writing letters of thanks. But none of that mattered to Max. He didn't understand fame. He didn't know what hero meant. What he knew was that Lily was safe. His humans were near. The house smelled wrong now, scorched and foreign, but he still recognized their scent, and that was enough. The family had temporarily moved into Mark's sister's guest house on the edge of town. It was cramped, but it was warm and safe. And Lily had started smiling again. Emily watched her daughter sleeping that afternoon, curled in the same blanket Max had dragged across the floor the night of the fire. The blanket still smelled faintly of smoke, and she couldn't bring herself to wash it. It was part of the memory now. She turned as Mark entered the small living room holding his phone. "It's gone national," he said. "The Today Show called. They want to do a remote interview." Emily blinked. "Are you serious?" He nodded, looking down at Max, who was lying in the corner near the fireplace with a chew toy someone had dropped off earlier. "They want us to talk about what happened, show him on air." Emily sat down slowly. "It's a lot, I get it, but it feels weird." "I know." Mark sat beside her. "But maybe it's not a bad thing. People want to hear something good for once, and Max deserves to be recognized." Emily looked across the room at the dog who had changed everything, their protector, their alarm system, their silent guardian. "He doesn't care about the cameras." "No," Mark agreed, smiling. "But maybe some family out there watching will look at their dog a little differently tonight. Maybe someone else will start trusting their instincts more." They both turned to look at Max. His ears twitched slightly at the sound of his name, but he didn't move. His eyes were half closed. A patch of singed fur on his shoulder still hadn't grown back, and his paws were cracked from the heat and dragging Lily's weight. But he didn't show pain. He simply rested, still near, always watching. Later that evening, when the sun began to set and the soft orange light filtered through the living room window, Emily took a photo. It was a simple moment. Lily, sitting, on the rug, holding her plush koala in both hands, and Max curled beside her like a sentinel, their heads almost touching. She posted it quietly, without tags or hashtags, with just a few words. "He saved her life before she even knew the world. Could be dangerous." The post went viral within minutes, and as night settled in and the wind rattled softly against the windows of their temporary home, Max finally stretched out across the rug, sighed, and closed his eyes. Surrounded by the only pack he'd ever loved. He had done his job, but the world was only beginning to understand just how extraordinary that job had been. The invitation came a week later, hand-delivered by a city official with a camera crew in tow. The mayor wanted to recognize Max publicly, not just as a family dog or a pet who happened to be alert that night, but as a true local hero. The city council had voted unanimously. Max would receive the Canine Medal of Valor, the first of its kind ever awarded in their town. Emily stared at the letter for a long time after reading it. It was embossed in gold, printed on thick cream paper, and yet all she could think of was that night, how Max had growled at her, pulled her baby by the onesie, and barked through the fire, not for praise, but from pure, unfiltered love. "He wouldn't care about any of this," she whispered. To Mark, who nodded, "But he deserves it anyway." The ceremony was simple, just the way they asked for it. Held at the city park under a white tent with rows of folding chairs, it was attended by the fire department, a few city officials, local news crews, and dozens of neighbors who had watched the story unfold from across the street. Children clutched homemade signs, "Thank you, Max" was painted in crayon on a banner strung between two trees. When Max walked down the makeshift aisle in his red service vest, guided by Emily, the crowd stood and clapped. Lily, perched on Mark's hip in a yellow dress, waved wildly at him and shouted, "Maxie!" over the noise. Max didn't flinch. He walked calmly, ears high, tail swaying once or twice. He didn't bark, he didn't pose, he just showed up, exactly as he had the night of the fire. The mayor gave a short speech. The fire chief followed, sharing details of how quickly the fire had spread, how close the call had truly been. And then Emily stepped forward with Max's leash in her hand. She wasn't used to public speaking, but when she looked down at the dog sitting patiently beside her, she found her voice. "I used to think Max was just a loyal family dog," she said, eyes scanning the crowd. "But that night I realized he's something else. He's not just part of the family, he's the reason we're still a family." The audience fell silent. When everyone else was asleep, Max smelled the danger. He saw the baby was in trouble. And he acted, not with panic, with purpose. She paused, her voice catching. "We lost a lot that night, but not the things that matter most. Not Lily, not each other, and not Max." She crouched down and placed the small gold medallion around his neck. He blinked up at her, calm and unbothered by the attention. His tongue lolled out slightly, and he let out a soft huff. The applause was thunderous. Later that night, back at the temporary house, Emily and Mark sat in silence on the couch, Lily asleep in her crib nearby. Max lay at the foot of the couch, the medal now hanging on the doorknob, not his collar. The news continued to buzz, but they'd turned off the TV. It wasn't about the fame anymore. It never had been. "What happens when we move back?" Emily asked quietly. "When the house is rebuilt?" Mark looked at her. "We start again, but different, with open eyes." They both looked down at Max. "He'll be older by then," she said, voice soft. "Slower, maybe," Mark nodded. "But he'll still be Max, still watching." Outside, the wind shifted. Rain began to fall again, light, rhythmic, peaceful. Emily stood, walked to the door and opened it just a crack. Max trotted over and sat beside her, gazing into the night. She didn't need to speak, he already knew. He had done what no one else could. Not for glory, not for headlines, but for love, for instinct, for his pack. And in that quiet moment, with the rain gently tapping the porch and his family behind him, Max stood guard once more, just in case.